Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Lab Technical Standards Information session. My name is Maron Malikan, and I am the Outreach Director here at the Office of Cannabis Management. I will be one of the four presenters this afternoon. We are looking forward to hosting this informational webinar to guide prospective licensees through Minnesota's new lab technical standards for sampling and testing cannabis products. Licensed cannabis testing facilities in the state will use these standards to ensure the products being sold in Minnesota are safe. As you all likely know, testing cannabis for safety and potency is a critical and necessary component of the industry. I would like to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the OCM webpage for your review in the coming days. To get us started, I would like to provide you with a brief walkthrough of our agenda. We will provide a general OCM update, proceed to discussing lab standards, have a presentation on compliance and working with OCM, have an introduction into Metrc, and finally, we'll walk through some of those pre-submitted questions for today's informational session. I would like to note that this is the first of what we hope to be many educational opportunities to learn about the various regulatory pieces in the cannabis industry. This afternoon, in addition to myself, we will have Hannah Timms, our regulatory lab coordinator, speak about lab standards. Margaret Wyatrowski, our enforcement and compliance director, who will speak to compliance and working with OCM. And lastly, Alex Stoyakin, our technical systems coordinator, who will give us an introduction into Metrc. A few ground rules for today's presentation. The Q&A function is turned on, and we will attempt to answer questions throughout the presentation. Questions that are not answered will be saved from our team, and will help us shape and update our FAQ page. Our team will go through a series of the pre-submitted questions at the end of the presentation. For any unanswered questions, please reach out to cannabis.info@state.mn.us. And just to kind of ground us, on the Office of Cannabis Management, the OCM was established to promote public health and welfare, protect public safety, eliminate the illicit market for cannabis flower and cannabis products, meet the market demand for cannabis flower and cannabis products, promote a craft industry for cannabis flower and cannabis products, prioritize growth and recovery in communities that have experienced disproportionate negative impact from cannabis prohibition. So now I'm going to walk through a few just general OCM updates, just so that you are aware of some of the things that have been happening within our office. And then we'll quickly go to the main part of the presentation, which I'm sure you guys are all here for. Before we get into the next part of the presentation, I just want to highlight a recent announcement from OCM. The OCM announced the Can Grow Farmer Training and Farmer Loan Grants on April 22nd. This grant window is from the 22nd until June 3rd. The Can Grow Farmer Training and Farmer Loan Grants will help eligible organizations provide educational resources, guidance, and low-interest loans for farmers who want to be part of the legal cannabis industry. The program has two focus areas: Can Grow Farmer Training Grants, which fund eligible organizations to provide those educational materials, training, technical support, etc., to farmers who want to enter or expand into the legal cannabis industry. The project categories eligible for funding are further outlined in the RFP, or the request for proposals. The Can Grow Farmer Loan Grants will fund nonprofit corporations to assist farmers by providing low-interest loans for entering the legal cannabis industry. To learn more about this grant, as well as other grants, specifically technical assistance grants, you can check out the Office of Cannabis Management's webpage under the Division of Social Equity, as well as under our grant section. And over there, you'll find the OCM grants, as well as links to some of our other state agencies that are hosting a number of grants as well. The OCM continues to remain steadfast in our direction towards market launch. There are a few contributing pieces that I'd like to just talk through briefly. Rulemaking being one of them. As you likely have caught in the news, the rules governing Minnesota's adult use cannabis industry are formally adopted and in effect after being approved by an administrative law judge and published in the Minnesota State Register on Monday, April 14th. More information about the specific rules and a copy of them can be found on the OCM website under, I believe it says cannabis rulemaking. Next being compacts. Minnesota's cannabis law allows the governor or his designee to enter into compacts with tribal governments to address jurisdictional issues related to the medical cannabis and adult use cannabis industries. These compacts are intended to enhance public health and safety, ensure a safe and well-regulated medical and adult use cannabis markets, encourage economic development, and provide fiscal benefits to both tribal nations and the state. And lastly, I wanted to speak a bit about licensing. The OCM is continuing their review of applications right now. Approved applicants for uncapped licenses are in a position to receive licenses as rules have been adopted. And OCM still anticipates hosting lotteries in May and June for for those capped licenses. As you likely are tracking, we have passed many milestones from anything from our social equity verification window earlier this year to our licensing application window, both opening and closing, to the adoption of rules, and currently the review of capped and uncapped license applications. We are still on track to host lotteries for our capped license types in May and or June. And so I really just want to take a look at this and just recognize the various milestones that we've made and kind of where we are in this timeline. This graphic can be found on the OCM website as well, and it's just a good way to kind of track both where you are if you are a potential licensee or an applicant, as well as just track some of the progress that's happening at OCM. I also wanted to just briefly show this slide, just as a reminder of the various license types that exist, both capped versus uncapped, and a reminder that we haven't launched the event organizer, the lower potency hemp edible manufacturer, and the retailer licenses. And those licenses will be available later in 2025. But overall, this is just a breakdown of the various license types as a part of this industry, as well as the various ones that have specific limitations, such as caps, versus the ones that are uncapped. And again, this information can be found on the OCM website, as well as in some of our guidance materials. Lastly, before I turn it over to my colleagues, I wanted to share this helpful guide that we put together for licensees. This is a tool for prospective cannabis licensees to further understand their path towards licensure. You can download this tool from our website and follow it throughout your specific licensure process. But I really do just want to sit with this briefly, as I think it's helpful in understanding everything from step one, when you are first starting your application, to once your application is under review, to when you move through qualified applicant or preliminary applicant status. And so this guide specifically can be found on our website as well. And so we'll make sure that there's some follow-up communication that happens after, once we have this webinar posted on our website and through both our Gov Delivery and through the Cannabis Insider, to ensure that you have all of these resources to kind of see where you are within this process. I also want to acknowledge that I know that there are a ton of questions, and we are going to head into the more focused part of the presentation now. But I encourage folks, please submit your questions into the Q&A function. My colleagues and I are reviewing those questions, and we're trying to answer them as quickly as possible. If we don't get to your specific question, we are planning to do follow-up and use those questions to inform our FAQ page. And so please, as you have questions, submit them directly into the Q&A function. on your screen, and we'll try our best to be able to answer those. We also have a number of your pre-submitted questions that you sent as you were registering for this event. And so we are planning to address those pre-submitted questions at the end of the presentation. And again, this will all be recorded and it'll be posted on our website so that you'll be able to have access there as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Hannah, who will talk through technical standards for sampling and testing.
Thank you, Maroon. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm just going to provide an introduction to the technical standards that will define batch testing for all cannabis products in Minnesota. So the introduction is in the form of a series of questions. So what is the technical standard for sampling and testing? How did we develop the standards? Who will use them? How will they be used? How are Minnesota standards different from other states? And then I'll walk through a couple examples of product testing and address other ways that lab testing will be done in Minnesota. So according to statute, each product in the Minnesota cannabis market must be tested to demonstrate that relevant contaminants are evaluated and that the potency of the product matches the labeling and follows the requirements of statute to protect public safety. The technical standards for sampling and testing cannabis products is where those contaminants and the evaluation thresholds they'll be evaluated against are listed. It also houses a list of the cannabinoids that must be evaluated and the variance that is allowed between the test results and the potency claims. The technical standards also have information on additional requirements for how to carry out the testing of products in a scientifically sound and defensible way. These additional requirements include how to prepare a representative sample, how to report the results, and what criteria are required to demonstrate that the scientific analysis was sound. So here in green is the list of contaminant and potency categories that are addressed in the standard. How were the standards developed? The statute defines the contaminants that must be evaluated in cannabis products regulated by the office. That list on the previous page is the broad category. The statute also calls out ensuring that the potency of the products is accurate, and this assessment includes evaluating homogeneity of individual units and the stability of the products over time. So a group of technical experts from the Department of Ag, Health, and OCM were already at work on this document when I joined the office. And we collaborated to develop the list of compounds that would be evaluated in each test category and the levels that would be used to evaluate risk to public safety. Much of the standard is in line with the testing requirements from other states and guidance from national organizations. The list that we pulled together was then reviewed by subject matter experts, the Cannabis Advisory Council, and OCM leadership. Who will use the standards? So a really large portion of the technical standards is primarily relevant to the licensed testing laboratories and the Minnesota Reference Lab. They are the entities that will be tasked with ensuring that each of the analytes can be tested at the levels listed for each product matrix. However, the testing requirements listed in this document are relevant to all licensees who grow or manufacture cannabis or hemp products for sale in Minnesota, especially since they will be sampling their products for lab testing. It's the responsibility of the licensee to ensure that their product has been evaluated as described in the technical standards and the statute and has met the criteria to be sold in the state. Also, any curious consumers may want to know how their product has been tested. How are the standards used? Licensed testing labs will use the standards to ensure their testing methods meet the criteria listed for each of the products. They will also follow the requirements in the standards for reporting results, performing quality control, doing proficiency testing, and method selection. The licensees will track their products through the testing flowchart and ensure that the products are tested for and meet the requirements at each phase of production. How are Minnesota standards different from other states? The technical standard is very similar in many respects to the cannabis testing plans for other states. We're testing the same sets of contaminants, similar cannabinoids, similar levels. One of the things that makes the Minnesota standard unique is that while other states only test the final product, we are testing the product by phase as they move through the production cycle. More on this on the next slide. At the same time, there will be an OCM surveillance program run through the Minnesota Cannabis Reference Lab that is operated through the Department of Ag. So more on that later as well. But the surveillance testing with the reference lab serves as a check on the compliance of the whole industry. So while other states have a reference lab, they were not able to launch the surveillance testing program at the same time as adult use testing. And that is going to put Minnesota in a unique position as we start our adult use operation program. So by testing products by phase, not every product needs to be tested for every contaminant at each phase, but each product will be evaluated for all of the relevant contaminants at the point of greatest concentration in the cannabis production cycle and prior to retail sale. So this ensures that the relevant contaminants are evaluated at the point of greatest risk in the products while limiting the overall testing burden for the industry. So for example, if flower was grown and harvested for the purpose of extracting the cannabinoids to make a more concentrated form, then no testing is required prior to extraction. Although we strongly recommend that you do testing, all contaminants must be evaluated at the concentrate phase. This is because contaminants like pesticides and heavy metals may be retained during the concentration steps and be at a higher concentration in the extracted resin or rosin. So once a concentrated solution has met the testing criteria for contaminants, then it can be used to make many other final products. Each manufacturer will need to evaluate what additional risks are present in the final product based on their manufacturing process and also test for those. So for example, if a product used a solvent for further processing, then residual solvents would also need to be evaluated again. For products that are not tracked through the product life cycle, like those on the previous page, we may not have access to the data from testing at each phase in the product life cycle. Therefore, all of the contaminants and potency will be evaluated on those products in their final form before they can be transferred to retail locations for sale. So for example, any cannabis from a tribal market or any lower potency hemp edible beverage that's imported from another state must be tested and meet these standards before they can be sold in a Minnesota licensed retail location. So I'm going to walk through a couple different examples for you now. So laboratory testing for flower. When a cultivator has dried flower intended to be packaged for retail sale, they will prepare a representative sample of the batch following an SOP and under video surveillance and send that sample to the state licensed lab to perform the required testing as listed for each category. So that's microbial, mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides, foreign matter, potency, and stability. And this is all going to be programmed through Metrc. Each batch of flower tested must meet the requirements delineated in the technical standards. Once the testing is complete and the flower has been demonstrated to meet the criteria, the product can enter the retail market. So if, on the other hand, the flower is intended to be further processed into concentrate, no batch testing is required under the technical standards. However, it's highly recommended that microbial, heavy metals, pesticides, and potency are tested. The contaminants can be carried through and concentrated when cannabinoid concentrates are prepared. So testing that those contaminants are not present in the flower can help to ensure that the concentrate will also meet the criteria after extraction and avoid contaminating your extraction equipment. So for concentrates, intended to be packaged for retail sales or to use for the production to manufacture finished products, the manufacturer will prepare a representative sample of the batch following an SOP and under video surveillance and send that sample to a state licensed lab to perform the required testing as listed for each category: microbial, mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents, potency and stability. Each batch of concentrate tested must meet the requirements delineated in the standards. And once the testing is complete, the product has met the criteria. It can either go into the market or be used to manufacture finished products. So once we get to the finished product stage, when the cannabis flower or concentrate has been tested for and meets the requirements for all of the relevant contaminants, then a product made from that tested concentrate or flower does not need to be tested for those same contaminants again. However, the manufacturer must conduct a risk assessment for each contaminant to document that the testing regime is appropriate and no contaminant risks are overlooked. So for example, vape cartridges may leach heavy metals into the finished product. Therefore, heavy metal contamination should be evaluated in the final product for a vape device. So when a manufacturer has finished production, they will take a representative sample following an SOP and under video surveillance, send that to the lab for the required testing. In this case, the required testing is microbial, potency, homogeneity, and stability. All of the other contaminants have already been tested. So each batch must meet the requirements delineated in the document, and once they've met those requirements, then they can move to retail sales. So there are 4 main ways that products will be tested in Minnesota, and we've talked a lot about batch testing and a little about surveillance testing. There's also research and development testing and incident response testing. So again, the technical standard defines the batch analysis. Research and development testing is strongly recommended for all licensees to understand what is in their flower or their products, what is the potency, etc. R&D testing can also be used to analyze non-cannabis ingredients like your soil quality, water testing, materials testing, etc. All of the results from R&D testing will also be reported through Metrc. Incident response testing will be done in response to complaints that are received that involve negative health impacts that are likely due to cannabis products, and those samples will be analyzed by the state reference lab. And again, the balance for batch testing plan is surveillance testing. And I am grateful that the writers of the adult use statute, including funding for the state-run reference lab that will function as the referee in contested samples, to test surveillance samples, and to run any for-cause investigations that are necessary. So just one more clarification on surveillance testing is that surveillance testing is a parallel path whereby OCM will have inspectors in licensee locations throughout the state, collecting samples to be evaluated separate from the batch analysis. OCM will not sample all of the products in the state, but will take samples of a representative subset of all cannabis products in the state. These products will be sent to the Cannabis Reference Lab for analysis. The results of the surveillance, sampling, and testing will be compared to the crop inputs reported by the cultivators and the manufacturing plans from manufacturers and the results of batch testing analysis reported by the licensed testing labs. By comparing the surveillance results to what was recorded and reported by the licensed industry, OCM will be able to assess the overall compliance of the industry and to assess if the batch testing by state license lab is catching the relevant contaminants and risks in the system. So that is my summary and introduction to the technical standards for sampling and testing from OCM. And again, the technical standards define batch testing, but are relevant to many other ways that cannabis will be tested. With that, I will hand it over to Margaret to talk about compliance.
Thank you. Hey, Maroon, when I clicked take over, it went away.
It looks like you may have control, but let me go ahead and see if I can.
Can you guys see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Oh, I just can't see it.
Maybe if you click, if you're able to see where it says compliance and working with OCM, if you're able to click on that, if it shows up. I could also take control quickly, and then if you want to try to take it back from me.
Yeah, I can't see I can't see it at all, but that's okay. I'll just say advanced slide, I guess. Okay, so can you go to the first slide on my deck?
So we are there. 1 second. I'm just going to take control quickly.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Wyatrowski, and I am the Director of the Compliance and Enforcement Division at the Office of Cannabis Management. I'm going to talk a little bit about our division, just like how we're structured and what we do, and then I will get into what our role is during the licensing process, which I think a lot of you are on the cusp of embarking on. And then we'll just talk a little bit about our responsibilities and like where you might interact with us throughout the licensing cycle. So the Compliance and Enforcement Division team is mostly made up of compliance inspectors. There are also a few enforcement coordinators and a few supervisors. There's a coordinator for our program as a whole. And then, of course, Hannah, who just presented, is our laboratory specialist, and she's part of our team as well. I'm sure many of you have worked with us in the past, and you probably are maybe familiar with some of our inspectors if you own a registered hemp-derived cannabinoid business. So our team has been regulating those businesses for almost 2 years now. And the inspectors will continue to visit the hemp-derived cannabinoid businesses, the registered businesses, while also adding on the cannabis and then the lower potency hemp edible businesses as they get licensed and come online. So if you look back at that big graphic, the pathway graphic that Marone had shown that shows like the whole pathway through the licensing, my division's role picks up at step 4 on that from start to license pathway graphic that was shown at the beginning. So we haven't been involved in a lot of the licensing so far, but we will as you really near the end of the licensing cycle. So starting on this slide here, what do we do during licensing? So once the applicant has submitted their final plans of record, they're nearing the end of the licensing phase, and then those final plans of record will come to our team. So the inspector that is assigned to cover the region where the applicant's business is will first review the final plans for completeness and compliance with the statute and rule. So after they do that sort of desktop audit review, then the inspector will reach out to the applicant and arrange to have a phone call with the applicant. And during that phone interview, we'll just go through the whole inspection checklist with them and just to kind of talk about like what we will be looking for, what are we going to look at during the inspection, and just like so you can kind of get a better idea of like what's going to happen during the inspection and if you're actually ready to be inspected at that time. And then if we identified anything during our final plan of record review, if we saw anything that needed to be changed or fixed, then we'll discuss it with you during that phone call. So then the applicant will have a chance to update or fix the final plans. And then you can also fix anything in your facility if you've identified like, oh, I have a deficiency during that phone call. So it's really a way for us to make sure we're all on the same page because it's new for everyone. And, we don't want to come out and do an inspection if you have like one little thing that's wrong. So it's really to try to set you up for a successful pre-license inspection. So once the applicant has notified us that they're ready, then we will go and conduct the pre-license inspection. And during that inspection, we're going to be looking at the facility and the business's processes and SOPs and just making sure everything is compliant and that the final plans match what we actually see in the facility. You can go to the next slide. So the pre-license inspections obviously are done before the business gets licensed. So they're done before the business starts operation. So there won't be any cannabis plants, there won't be any cannabis processing, there won't be any cannabis materials or anything that present on the site during that visit. It will be done, before licensing and before anything has started. So we're really going to be checking the business's readiness and checking that their compliance with statute and rule using a checklist. We'll also be verifying the business's compliance with local regulations at that time. So right before we go out to do our pre-license inspections, the applicant will also have just had their local inspection where they're looking at, your local government is going to confirm that the business location meets all zoning regulations and other local rules and ordinances. And so we will check that local compliance paperwork during our inspection. And all that pre-work that I talked about, like the final plan of record review, the phone call, all of that pre-work is done to really try to like set the applicant up for success. And if we identified deficiencies at the inspection, like if we see that anything needs to be fixed, there isn't any kind of like failure or denial. It's just they can't pass into the licensing phase until they've made those fixes. So, we'll talk about like anything that has to be fixed, how it can happen, and then the applicant can correct and then let us know when they've fixed it and we can do another inspection. Next slide. So after you actually are licensed, then we will get on a schedule of doing annual compliance inspections on, an annual basis. They will not be tied to renewal. So it will just happen, sometime within the year span of a license time period. Some other things that the inspectors will do as part of the compliance work, besides just going to actually physically inspect the location, we'll be using Metrc, which is the seed to sale tracking system, to monitor activities. So, looking at how batches are moving through the process and checking for anomalies and, possible diversion or inversion that way. And then also we will be using Metrc to check for all the test results for all the products. So all of the testing that is required to be done for all products according to the technical standard, that's how the lab will report to the licensee. And then that's also how the OCM will check to make sure all the product testing is done according to the standard. And then inspectors will also collect random samples for the surveillance testing program, as Hannah had discussed. And that's just really to get like a snapshot of the compliance of the entire system. And then another thing we do, which is critical, is responding to complaints. And sometimes that involves just further investigation, and sometimes it will lead to an inspection based on the complaint. Next slide. So just want to wrap up by saying that the office in general, and especially the Compliance and Enforcement Division, we are really here primarily to protect public health and safety. That's at the core of everything we do. And, to inspire consumer confidence and keep the market safe. And in order to do this, we really have to work together. And you should feel free to use us as a resource and ask us whatever questions you have. For any of you that have a hemp business, you will know that anytime an inspector goes to do an inspection, they're leaving their card that has their phone number and their email address on there. So your inspector will provide, you'll have their contact information, and you really should feel free to reach out to them and ask any questions that you have. We really, really are committed to helping businesses to be compliant and to be successful. And it's a brand new market. I mean, we're in this together. So education and outreach are key, to help everybody be successful. So, and then just to that end, we do have some outreach publications that are in the works and will be posted soon. So the pre-license inspection checklists. So, in addition to the phone interview, we'll also provide those checklists to you so you know what we'll be checking. And then some GMP and facility construction guidelines, information, and then also a packaging and labeling guide, which will have like a generic label template that you can look at and just get all the packaging and labeling requirements in one easy to reference document. And that's all I have. So now I will pass it over to Alex.
Hey folks, my name is Alex and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about Metrc. So what is it? It's not to be confused with the Metrc system of measurement, but overall it is the seed to sale solution used by Minnesota and many other legalized states. And so it is tracking the life cycle of the product, as Hannah and Margaret had mentioned earlier. And so anything from, immature plants to the final packaged product that will go out to the consumer. And how do they do this? They're using track and trace technology. So the key thing in here is that if it's tagged, it's traceable. So as you can see in this graphic, there is a picture of a tag and somebody using an RFID reader to scan the tag that is located on the plant. And so the cool thing is that you can monitor the growth cycle of the plants and the product. And there is a tag, a plant tag, that is associated with that plant throughout its growth cycle, and then it gets another tag as it is packaged and processed into a different product. So you can continue that chain of custody and movement throughout the life cycle and continue to look at the history of that product as it moves through. And so again, looking at some of those key features of Metrc, monitoring the growth cycle of plants. And so, there's a different cycles of plants with, immature seedlings all the way to the harvest batch, and looking at that. Also, there you're able to examine lab test results. There's also reporting tools in Metrc, which is called Metrc Insights, which uses dashboards and reports that you could create for looking at different aspects. And then also you can seamlessly integrate with point of sale. One of our most common ones is Dutchie, and that allows for looking at those as well. And so how do you get started with Metrc? So once your cannabis license is issued, you'll create an account with Metrc, and then you'll have training to go through. There's an LMS or learning management system through Metrc Learn that you can go through, and it's required for at least one employee in order to gain access to Metrc. And so once you have done training through Metrc Learn, then you can start using the system. And there are plenty of resources to get started, which includes Metrc Learn. And then once you get access to Metrc, there's Metrc support, which is, there's an email and a call line for that. There's also a user manual. And then also Metrc OCM staff like myself are here to help. So, and with that, we'll start going into some pre-submitted questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We got a lot of questions and don't have time to answer them all, but we will be working on getting the answers to as many of these as we can, updated and on the FAQ page of our website. So one of the questions that we've heard from several people is why are the sample sizes for flour and concentrate the same? Is there any way to lower the required sample size for concentrate? So the calculation for how much sample was required for lab testing includes a portion of the sample to be retained by the manufacturer until 6 months after the expiration date of the product. And then there's the amount that's required for the actual laboratory testing. And this estimation comes from the required analyte testing. And for microbials, there's a higher requirement so that you have a representative amount for that analysis. So we looked back at the numbers, and when we initially did our calculation, we thought it was easier to simplify and have one number for all of the testing that is required. But after review, we are adjusting the minimum compliance sample amount required for concentrates to 42 grams, and we will be updating the technical standard to reflect that. So there's a table in the technical standard on how much sample is required. And so many things are still the same. You need 10 or 12 sample increments. We decreased the amount of retention sample that must be retained by the manufacturer or the cultivator. And then we're able to adjust the sample amounts that are required to be sent to the lab for testing after reviewing some of that. When will lab testing be available? Testing will be available when one of the testing facilities has been licensed. There are 2 labs who have previously been performing the medical cannabis testing, and they may be ready for adult use testing before the labs that still need to establish a location and get instruments. The timeline for testing depends significantly on how long it takes the labs to be ready to meet the new technical standards. And then the office will inspect those locations and ensure that they are ready to move forward. So is there a testing lab open yet, or how soon will labs be able to open once the licenses are issued? So a testing facility will be able to operate as soon as they are licensed. They can move forward through the application process when they have met all of the pre-licensing requirements and when they are ready to submit their final plans of record. What if there aren't enough labs to test all of the products at launch? So it is possible that there will be limited lab testing available to start. We're focused on evaluating the labs for licensing as soon as they are ready to start that process. We're also moving a legislative proposal forward to ease one of the barriers to licensing for testing facilities. And our priority is to do everything we can to get testing facilities online and available for use as fast as possible. Will testing facilities be assigned, or will people be able to shop their labs? So the licensee may select the testing facilities that they choose to work with. The testing facility licensed by OCM is required to test all of the products to the levels described in the technical standard document. And once a batch is submitted to the lab for testing, the results must be uploaded to Metrc by the testing facility. So cultivators and manufacturers may conduct testing for research and development, but those samples must also be reported through Metrc. Can we get a list of the accredited local labs and a list of the standards, thresholds, and maximum tolerances? So the technical standard is that list of limits, and the office will be hosting on our website the list of currently approved labs and which analytes they are approved to test for. When must all products being sold in Minnesota comply with the new testing standards? So any product produced by an entity that is licensed under Minnesota Statute 342 will need to follow the new testing standards. So everyone who's applied for a license in this round, as soon as they get a license, their products must be tested. So we have currently hemp products that are regulated under 152 and medical products under 4770. And once they are licensed under 342, then they will need to be tested under these new technical standards. Can dispensaries do their own lab testing, or do we need to outsource to a qualified lab? So all compliance testing must be performed by a lab licensed by OCM in Minnesota. So while your product may be tested in-house for research purposes, only testing done by a state licensed lab can be used for the required compliance testing, and that's a statutory requirement. So given the lack of testing applications and immense anticipation for an open market, what plans are in place for limited testing access? Is the intent to allow tribal compacts to cover the lack of sellable product? So there's really three parts to this. The governor's cannabis bill this year included a recommendation to create a variance for the requirement that a testing lab have ISO 17025 accreditation at the time of licensing application. OCM believes that this variance will allow us to have a lot more labs up and running and draw additional testing facility applications if it's passed. Currently, there are 10 qualified applicants and 2 preliminarily approved applicants for testing facilities. So this is actually a relatively high number in relation to other states. So for example, Maryland, whose adult use market opened recently, has 4 testing labs, and Colorado has 7. And currently, there are no executed tribal compacts. The intent of the compacts is to establish how the tribal markets will interact with the state market, including the sale of product between the markets. It is expected that any product that enters the Minnesota market will be tested and to the established OCM testing standards. So that is the questions that we have time for now. Around.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all staying with us and submitting these questions. I know that this is also not an exhaustive list. We're trying to address some of your questions in the Q&A, as well as we know that there were a number of additional questions, not necessarily about lab testing, but about Metrc or about other topics that were pre-submitted as well. And so the next steps for our office right now is really continuing to be able to work with our subject matter experts to be able to answer those questions. We are designating a place on our website specifically by subject area based off of the questions that you guys are submitting over to us. And so we want to have a ever exhaustive list of FAQs that we'll have. And so we are hoping to get a lot of those stood up within this next week. Our next step after this as well is to make sure that we're captioning this webinar and that we're posting it. And so our goal is to have this up on our website next week and that you all will receive communication, especially those that have registered for this webinar. And so we'll be sure to send out a Gov delivery message as soon as this is posted online, as well as soon as we have our FAQs on the website. But I do just want to note that please continue to submit your questions. I will just note that those that have already sent their questions today or that have included them in the Q&A function, we are already downloading those and are working with our SMEs to be able to answer them and have them as guidance on our webpage. But if there are additional questions that come up after watching this video a second time or things that come up in the upcoming days, please send them to cannabis.info@state.mn.us, and we will try our best to address those questions. I will just note that everything that you guys ask in real time really does inform our guidance, and I know that it helped inform this presentation today as well. And so I just want to I'm going to try to spend a few more minutes in the Q&A and just trying to answer some of those. But I will just let you guys know that we will have all of this updated guidance posted on our webpage. If you haven't already, please sign up for the Cannabis Insider newsletter. It is directly on our webpage. If you go onto our webpage and scroll all the way down, there's a place for you to submit your email. Those that are connected, that receive the compliance email, you will also receive communication about that there. But the best way to really just stay in contact with our office is making sure that you're signed up for these newsletters. If you are a prospective applicant, we're hoping to continue, or a prospective licensee that has an application submitted, we're hoping to continue to send education to you as well to further support you in your path to licensure. So I just want to thank you all again for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I just want to note that this will be one of what we hope to be many educational opportunities. And take care, everyone.